For the pumpkin cookie, I added a small oval, not in the center, but more towards the top half. That way it could be my guideline, so I'm going to be smaller at the oval and then get bigger as I work my way out. So that makes it look like a pumpkin once you get the frosting laid down. So you need that guideline. So if you don't have the edible marker, you can just use a toothpick to scratch something in the cookie, or you could use frosting or food coloring. You just need that guideline in there to help you keep the cookie flowing right. So notice how I hold my bag. There's no specific way, in my opinion. I feel like I hold my bag weird, my bag of frosting. So however you feel comfortable holding your frosting, do that. So I was trying to get comfortable with mine, and so now I'm going to start. So slowly just pulling out bigger at the bottom and round it off, and it will look more like a pumpkin. And then come back to the oval. Then you're going to fill it in. And if you'll notice, my frosting is not very thin because I like to use my outline frosting and my flood frosting using the same one, so I don't have to use two different bags and two different frostings. Some people outline with a thicker frosting and then have a really thin frosting in the middle. There's no right or wrong way. Just experiment, see what you're comfortable with. But I like just having to use one bag of frosting. So you'll see that it starts to fill in even before I finish some other layers. So I'm going to go in and mix those up using a circular motion. This consistency, if you'll notice, it's got some spots raised where I've used my toothpick. So it was a tiny bit thick. It could have been a little bit thinner, and then those raised spots would have fallen back into the frosting. So, and just make sure that you don't let your frosting dry too much before you go in with a toothpick and try to fill it in, because that'll make some spots raised as well. So I'm leaving space in between those because I'm going to let this layer dry a little bit and then come back with another one. And it's going to give the definition in between the different pieces of the pumpkin. And you'll see what I'm talking about. It'll make it look really cool. So we just have to let it dry a little bit so that way it doesn't all run together. So I sped the camera up because I just do the same thing on the next two cookies, just like I did on the other one. You can see how it gets a little bit different with each one, but just keeping the bottoms rounded, and then you're going to want the different sizes smaller towards the middle and bigger as you go out to give it kind of the depth towards the stem. All right, last one. Get this one done, and by the time I got this one done, it was time for me to go back and add the next layer. So you'll see that in a minute. I used a toothpick here to press down some of those raised spots that I messed up. So I just pressed those down a little bit. And now you're going to add in some more of the same shapes. And you'll see when I move my hand, it's hard to get a good angle. There we go. See how it stays separated because the other two have dried a little bit? So it gives it some dimension and makes it look a little more realistic. I think they turned out so cool. So I'm just going to continue around, filling in the spots. Try to keep the bottoms rounded. And if you don't get it perfect, you can use your toothpick to move it around like I'm having to do, kind of to connect it just a little bit. It's already starting to look like a pumpkin. After I finished this layer, I let these cookies dry while I worked on another cookie. So I let them dry a little bit longer before I added the stems because the stems were a lot of icing, a lot of weight, and so we needed some to let this dry a little bit more so the stems don't just fall down into the frosting. And so I sped this up again, just showing how I filled these in. I wish I could work this fast. If you start doing this and you don't have the separation, or if your edges start blending together and you can't see the definition anymore, then you probably haven't let your cookie dry long enough. So just take some time and let it continue drying. I really liked making these pumpkin cookies and wanted to show you how to make these because they don't have to dry overnight to be able to finish the design. So sometimes some cookies that have lots of layers, you have to let them dry overnight just to get them completely dry. But these pumpkins came together really fast, as well as the other 2 cookies that we're making. So I got you some cookies that you won't have to spend so much time just waiting around on, because sometimes that's really frustrating. Last one, and on this one I had put a little bit too much frosting and it started falling off the edge, so I pulled it up to the top and saved it. And that's totally fine that filled in because we're just gonna put some green over the top. So after I let the cookies dry, I was working on another cookie, let them dry for a while, and then I was ready to add the vine and the stems. I was just testing out the vine to see how it was going to come out. I cut a very small end off of the Ziploc bag, and this green frosting is a stiff consistency. That means it's going to hold its shape. And I just did some swirls, just kind of pulled it and let it fall where it wanted to. It doesn't have to be perfect. You could also use brown if you want to use brown for the vines and the stem. That would work too. What I did was I did all of the vines first because I used the tip really skinny. And then later I cut off more of the tip so that way I could do a big stem. All right, time for the stem. So I just started really big and full at the bottom, then got smaller as I came up. Just kind of going back and forth. And doing the same on the other ones. There's no right or wrong way, just however you want to make your stem look. Kind of doubled that one up. Then once I was finished with the stems, I did take a toothpick and kind of cleaned them up just a little bit. The edges that pulled out. I couldn't decide what I liked and what I didn't like, and that's why I was going back and forth. But so I calmed down just a little bit, patted down some pointy edges. And that was it for these cookies. They came together so fast. I was really impressed with how they looked as well. I think I may have liked them even better if I would have done a brown stem.